Okay, today I'm taking a look at Wassily Kandinsky concerning the spiritual in art, translated and with an introduction by M.T.H Sadler in 1977, and I believe originally published in, I think it's 1914. And I'm going to go straight in, so skipping the translator's introduction, which is long, and the preface. And I'm going to be reading and commenting. Let's see what we can find here. So the introduction, the first section about general aesthetic, and the introduction concerning the spiritual in art. Every work of art is the child of its age, and in many cases, the mother of our emotions. It follows that each period of culture produces an art of its own, which can never be repeated. Efforts to revive the art principles of the past will at best produce an art that is stillborn. It is impossible for us to live and feel as did the ancient Greeks. It is impossible for us to live and feel as did the ancient Greeks. In the same way, those who strive to follow the Greek methods in sculpture achieve only a similarity of form. Achieve only a similarity of form, the work remaining soulless for all time, inanimate. Such imitation is mere aping. Externally, the monkey completely resembles a human being. He will sit holding a book in front of his nose and turn over the pages with a thoughtful aspect. But his actions have for him no real meaning. Okay, so I just wanted to make a couple of comments here. I'm going to be doing that because it's my video. And let me see. So first of all, I had so the way that um Michael Taussig on imitation, mastery of non-mastery in the age of meltdown, writes a lovely book about mimesis and imitation and how that extremely important faculty for human beings to imitate, to learn socially by copying what another is doing, by watching and taking it on, can be corrupted and downgraded by everything going on in the world at the moment. And so he's talking about a way of imitating what used to be good that was already good, rather than sort of imitating each other now in a way that is more, I don't know, more real, more of the present moment. So there's a kind of an ideal form of imitation, an ideal way to imitate. It's not that imitation itself is inherently wrong. It's that when we use it to refer back to a time which is not our own. So hopefully there can be something original here. And so if we simply sit here and look at this text and turn over these pages looking thoughtful, those actions won't really have meaning. What matters is whether it's, I would say what matters is whether it's original. Let's find out. There is, however, in art, another kind of external similarity. which is founded on a fundamental truth. When there is a similarity of inner tendency in the whole moral and spiritual atmosphere, a similarity of ideals, at first closely pursued but later lost to sight, a similarity in the inner feeling of any one period to that of another, the logical result will be a revival of the external forms, which served to express those inner feelings in an earlier age. An example of this today is our sympathy, our spiritual relationship, quote, with the primitives. Like ourselves, these artists sought to express in their work only internal truths, renouncing in consequence all consideration of eternal external form. So he's talking about a kind of internal similarity, right? Even though sort of if we have a similarity of inner feeling, then the logical result will be the revival of sort of similar external forms, which is a different kind of external similarity, not based on copying other kinds of external similarities, such as the Greeks, but coming from the same or similar inner place, inner feeling, and producing something similar in form as a result. So I just want to make a couple of short points here. First of all, would be that the idea of this quality of imitation that we were talking about. Well, what is it proper to imitate? And one might say life. Can we imitate life itself? Can we get closer to life, to animation, to aliveness? Can we be animated by that which is inspiring? And in that way, feel this kind of inner similarity, an inner tendency. And to me, that's kind of archetypal in a way. So archetypes as the sort of vessels of aliveness, that which the forms, the eternal forms that carry that aliveness, that we can resonate with and draw out and into our inspiration, through our inspiration into the world. So that's what I would mean when I would talk about the sort of the proper direction for imitation. But he was also saying, again, about this inner tendency, a similarity of inner ideals, which is at first closely pursued, but then later lost to sight. And so I would hear that in two ways. I would hear that in such a way that it's a kind of confession that this close pursuit of such ideals might disappear later in the same work, in this work. But I would also hear it in the way that it applies to a whole life. You know, when someone's initial work can be amazing, and then they kind of forget a bit of that as things go on. This similarity of ideals, at first closely pursued, but later lost to sight. And then he gave this example of how we have quote unquote sympathy, I would say deriving from sort of sympathetic magic with their quote primitives. Like ourselves, these artists sought to express in their work only internal truths, renouncing in consequence all consideration of external form. This all-important spark of inner life today is at present only a spark. Our minds, which are even now only just awakening after years of materialism, are infected with the despair of unbelief, of lack of purpose and ideal. So on this spark of inner life, obviously I would have overtones of Meister Eckhart. So the idea that there is a divine spark deeply within a source of aliveness, a source of vitality, a source of inspiration, and that it's all important, the highest value in a way. Deeply consonant with Eckhart. I would also hear the spark in terms of the child, the divine child, the idea that it's something precious, something fragile, something which has potential to set light, to cast light, to grow into a great fire. This all-important spark of inner life today is at present only a spark. Our minds, which even now are only just awakening after years of materialism, are infected with the despair of unbelief, of lack of purpose and ideal. The nightmare of materialism, which has turned the life of the universe into an evil, useless game, is not yet past. It holds the awakening soul still in its grip. It's a kind of cocoon or spiderweb. Only a feeble light glimmers like a tiny star in a vast gulf of darkness. This feeble light is but a presentiment, and the soul, when it sees it, trembles in doubt whether the light is not a dream and the gulf of darkness reality. This doubt and the still harsh tyranny of the materialistic philosophy divide our soul sharply from that of the primitives. Our soul rings cracked when we seek to play upon it, as does a costly vase long buried in the earth, which is found to have a flaw when it is dug up once more. For this reason, quote, the primitive phase through which we are now passing, with its temporary similarity of form, can only be of short duration. Okay, so there's a couple of things here. First of them is, the idea that there's a sort of spark of life that we carry within ourselves, which is a kind of source of inspiration or an inner tendency, giving rise to certain ideals, and which in a way constitutes the whole moral and spiritual atmosphere, from which place we can sort of resonate with the artists of other times and may give rise to similar forms. So the idea that that spark is fragile, is precious, is dimmed by materialism, that this spark is in a way that our soul is in relation to that. It's in a way a source of inspiration. Imagine that we hold a candle within us. And so the idea is that the fanning of the flame of the source of inspiration, the source of life, that's a symbolic, a mythopoetic way of talking about the awakening of the soul. And so there's a certain way of conceiving of the world, which is the nightmare of materialism. It turns the life of the universe into an evil, useless game without purpose, lacking sense, with no life. And that conception of reality is a trap for the soul. It's a kind of cocoon. It's a kind of spiderweb that grips the soul and prevents it from awakening. And the soul clings to that spark of light, which is feeble, and it glimmers like a tiny star in a vast gulf of darkness. And that reminds me of Jung. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to cast a light into the darkness of mere being. So the idea being that the awakening of that soul, the fanning of that flame of the spark of, let's say, divine inspiration, that's why we're here in a way, that process of becoming more conscious. But we doubt that because it's so small and the darkness is so huge. And so what is that doubt? Where's it coming from? Well, this materialism, this conception of the universe, it's a kind of tyranny. It's like, I'll try and describe what kind of tyranny it is. It's like when you're in a group chat. This is such a 2025 way of putting it, but if you're in a group chat and there's many people and they're all just lurking there, you know, the force of oppressive silence when you can feel people just watching and not saying anything. Well, this is it's a kind of tyranny. And the idea is that the universe, the cosmos, as conceived as without purpose, just matter, just dead, just darkness, it has the same kind of effect. It's tyrannical, it's oppressive, and it divides the soul. That actually wasn't in that. He said that it divides the soul sharply from that of the quote primitives. It makes our soul differ in that way because we doubt the source of our inspiration, which maybe they, let's assume, didn't. But here I think I've read in that it's not just that our soul is different in that way and that we doubt because that flame is so small, the spark, but also that our soul is divided. Quote, our soul rings cracked when we seek to play upon it, as does a costly vase long buried in the earth, which is found to have a flaw when it's dug up again. So a couple of things about that. He said our soul. And this reveals the notion again of the anima mundi, soul of the world. The idea is that not only can we recover the sense of our own soul, not only is that something that is actually available to us if we know how, but that there are in fact collective aspects to the soul. That the soul is something that can be revealed, disclosed in group practice, I would say. A couple of other ideas. One of them is kintsugi, which is that Japanese art of repairing broken crockery with like gold infused glue. And that this is, I mean, there's a great film about that, Mad to Be Normal, with David Tennant as R.D. Lang. It's about schizophrenia. And there's a great image of exactly the same kintsugi as this process of repairing the soul. And so imagine that our soul is like that. So what could it mean to repair our doubt, to not doubt in that way? The idea that that doubt that we have in the source of inspiration, it derives from the brokenness of the soul that can be repaired. I would also connect Byung-Chul Han on beauty, where smoothness is a sort of smoothness is like the pornography of beauty. So the idea that something can have a flaw can be repaired stronger in the same way that bones are grown back stronger is actually a mark of beauty. And in the same way, the doubt that we experience, the brokenness in our souls, is not a, it doesn't have to be a source of despair. It can be a source of purpose to repair our sense of who we are. Which reminds me of Ian McGilchrist when he talked about this, I think it's Kabbalah origin myth, that what creation is a cosmology, that what there are is sort of 12 divine vessels, 8 of which have been broken, shattered, and that the purpose of humanity in some way is to repair those vessels. Very similar. Okay, I'll shut up. But one other thing, which I think would be that when he said that this costly vase, which is the soul in a way, dug up again, can be found to have a flaw when it's dug up once more. Another way of hearing this would be as another confession. I think if this kind of a text is read again much later, it can be discovered to be flawed and in that way beautiful, more beautiful. So I'm saying that the text is embodying what he's talking about. Again, this all-important spark of inner life today is at present only a spark. Our minds, which are even now only just awakening after years of materialism, are infected with the despair of unbelief, of lack of purpose and ideal. The nightmare of materialism, which has turned the life of the universe into an evil, useless game, is not yet past. It holds the awakening soul still in its grip. Only a feeble light glimmers like a tiny star in a vast gulf of darkness. This feeble light is but a presentiment, and the soul, when it sees it, trembles in doubt whether the light is not a dream, and the gulf of darkness reality. This doubt, and the still harsh tyranny of the materialistic philosophy, divide our soul sharply from that of the primitives. Our soul rings cracked when we seek to play upon it, as does a costly vase long buried in the earth, which is found to have a flaw when it's dug up once more. For this reason, the primitive phase through which we are now passing, with its temporary similarity of form, can only be of short duration. These two possible resemblances between the art forms of today and those of the past will be at once recognized as diametrically opposed to one another. The first, being purely external, has no future. It's a kind of vestige, it's a remnant, it's a kind of inheritance. Whereas the second kind of resemblance, the one that we were just talking about, again, these two kinds are that there are two kinds of similarities or resemblances. One of them is in the external form, which he's talking about as purely external, and a vestige, a remnant, a kind of inheritance having no future. Whereas the second is a kind of inner similarity based on similarity of ideals, similarity of feeling, derived from the sense of this spark that we've been talking about. Again, the second, being internal, contains the seed of the future within itself. After the period of materialist effort, which held the soul in check until it was shaken off as evil, the soul is emerging, purged by trials and suffering. Shapeless emotions such as fear, joy, grief, which belonged to this time of effort, will no longer greatly attract the artist. He will endeavor to awake subtler emotions, as yet unnamed. Living himself a complicated and comparatively subtle life, his work will give to those observers capable of feeling them lofty emotions beyond the reach of words. Okay, so here we have a couple of things. The first is that we have this idea of a kind of inner correspondence or a similarity of form. So it's related to what we were talking about earlier in terms of Meister Eckhart, this kind of an inner truth or I would say mystical core. And so we sort of live in a story, and we think that that story is reality because we don't have any other stories to compare it to, really. We don't know how to look outside of that story. But it's the story that that darkness of the material world, that that's what's real, and that the soul and the story that we tell of a kind of inner light, that that's kind of dream. And the understanding here is that that itself is a story, and it's hard to see that. And that itself is a symptom of the time in which we're living. And so there's a way of understanding that sense of that flame that we're talking about, another metaphor for which is this seed, that it holds the future within itself. That there is a kind of source of inspiration, a kind of light or source of light and warmth within. In Jung, this would be the self, and it's from that inner place that the soul emerges. So the idea that by staying faithful, by staying in relationship to the source of inspiration, that the soul can embody this quality of growing, of emerging, of transformation, of enduring the trials and suffering of all of the bullshit. And in this way, the artist will endeavor to awaken subtler emotions, as yet unnamed. Shapeless emotions will no longer attract the artist. And his work will give to those observers capable of feeling them lofty emotions beyond the reach of words. Kandinsky continues. The observer of today, however, is seldom capable of feeling such emotions. He seeks in a work of art a mere imitation of nature, which can serve some definite purpose. For example, a portrait in the ordinary sense, or a presentment of nature according to a certain convention. For example, impressionist painting, or some inner feeling expressed in terms of natural form. As we say, a picture with Stimmung, Stimmung, Stimmung. Okay, so what he was talking about was that we, in this connection, the idea of, as I was saying, so staying faithful with the source of inspiration, and that the soul can go through a process of remembering itself, recovering itself, healing this inner split, and emerging into the light of day like a little plant over a long period of time. The idea that we can come to feel different emotions during that process, that our sensibility for life becomes more refined, more subtle. And there is less grossness, less heaviness. Well, the idea along with that he's talking about is that we're very rarely capable of that kind of thing today. And consequently, what we seek in art is just to imitate nature. And then he gives examples of that. So he sees that this lesser kind of art is like what he calls a normal portrait, or to seek a presentment of nature according to a certain convention, like impressionism, or even some inner feeling expressed in terms of natural form. And so I think the idea here is that what I would suggest that there's nothing wrong with inherently imitating nature, which is like just biomimicry, right? The idea is of stopping there. Indeed, we've run into a lot of difficulty when we haven't been imitating nature, Because we've just been designing our own thing, designing all these systems, right? Like laptops or like phones or like airplanes that all break a lot all the time. Whereas with it's kind of harder to break an eyeball or a rainforest. They're different. They're technically complex systems rather than complicated systems. So from that point of view, we can see that a lot more biomimicry would actually be a really good thing. But the issue is just stopping there and only imitating nature. And I think that's what he's pointing to. The idea is that there's nothing wrong with imitating nature per se, but that, like, let's say true art or the higher forms of art do more than that, can do more than that. I also need to try to express what he means by Stimmung, which is the word that he used. The translator says, Stimmung is almost untranslatable. It's almost sentiment in the best sense and almost feeling. Many of Corot's twilight landscapes are full of beautiful Stimmung. Kandinsky uses the word later on to mean the essential spirit. And I connected it with sort of atmosphere, with mood, with feeling, with the vibe, or Stimmung. Okay, so it's something that a picture has, it's a certain quality. Okay, and so he says, all those variety of picture, all those varieties of picture, when they are really art, fulfill their purpose and feed the spirit. Though this applies to the first case, the portrait, it applies more strongly to the third, quote, some inner feeling expressed in terms of natural form, as we say, a picture with Stimmung, where even the spectator does feel a corresponding thrill in himself. Such harmony or even contrast of emotion cannot be superficial and worthless. Indeed, the Stimmung of a picture can deepen and purify that of a spectator. The Stimmung of a picture can deepen and purify that of a spectator. Such works of art at least preserve the soul from coarseness. They key it up, so to speak, to a certain height. As a tuning key, the strings of a musical instrument. But purification and extension in duration and size of this sympathy of soul remain one-sided. And the possibilities of the influence of art are not exerted to their utmost. Okay, so a couple of comments about this and then I'll stop. So he's sort of describing like different kinds of art, and there's a kind of, in a way, a lesser form that is still great because it's art, right? That involves the fulfilling a certain purpose, like providing a portrait, for example. There's something about just imitating nature that he feels goes along with this. But he feels that, I think, that there are different kinds of art, obviously, and that some of them can, in a sense, higher. And well, what do we mean by that? That they, quote, feed the spirit, that they're really art. They fulfill their purpose and feed the spirit. And that this quality of feeding the spirit applies more strongly to some kinds of art than others. And like earlier, we were talking about this kind of inner space, right, in relation to this to the spark or seed of the soul. Or I would say it's actually the soul being in relation to that spark as spirit. But anyway, the point is that this kind of art can open space. It can deepen that space. It can allow us to feel more subtle and refined emotions, but it can also deepen and purify our interiority. So when we engage with art in this way, it can bring us into our own character, can bring us into our own soul, and in that way, heal that split between, I would call the different aspects of the soul, the higher and lower aspects of the soul. That's through Corbin, for anyone playing along at home. And so he's talking about a kind of reattunement process, reattuning ourselves to the key of the divine through art and the resonance that we feel when we engage with what art really is. But even this, he feels, is still very limited. It's one-sided, that kind of purification and sympathy of soul. As he said, the possibilities of the influence of art are not exerted to their utmost. And he's going to continue to talk about what that means by use of, he's going to use the imagination. And I'm going to come back to that. By the way, it's a mosaic in Saint Vital in Ravenna, which is the image. Okay, thank you, Wassily Kandinsky, concerning the spiritual in art.